London in 1851 sold 124 million oysters in a single year, not to rich people, to dock workers, factory girls, and street kids who hadn't seen a hot bath in a month. They ate them for a penny on cold corners, slurping shells empty under the gas lamps. But the part nobody tells you is what came with it. The same streets that fed millions also poisoned them. Bread laced with chalk, coffee bulked with baked horse liver, sweets so toxic that one little lozenge could kill 2 grown men. Around 30,000 costermongers wheeled barrows through London, selling everything from hot pies and pickled whelks to baked potatoes. Some of these foods were quietly brilliant for you. Others were quietly killing you. So let's break down exactly which was which. First up are the oysters that London's poorest actually lived on. Forget what you know about oysters today. In Victorian London, oysters were straight-up poverty food. Henry Mayhew, the journalist who walked the streets interviewing every vendor he could find, counted 124 million oysters sold by street sellers in 1851 alone. That worked out to roughly 129,650 pounds of business in one shellfish. The standard street price was 4 oysters for a penny. Kids bought them after school. Drunks bought them at midnight. Dock workers slurped them between shifts. Charles Dickens nailed it in his 1837 book, The Pickwick Papers, where his character Sam Weller says it's a very remarkable circumstance that poverty and oysters always seem to go together. The poorer the neighborhood, the more oyster stalls you'd see, sometimes 1 for every 6 houses. But the part that shocks people most is that these oysters were genuinely incredible for the people eating them, loaded with zinc, iron, B12, and clean protein. So while the rich got gout from rich beef dinners, dock workers built strong bones from a half-penny lunch. However, the oyster trade collapsed when pollution killed the Thames beds, which is exactly why oysters flipped from poor man's food to luxury status by the early 1900s. Now let's get into the hot eels that East Enders lived on. If you walked through Whitechapel at lunch in 1855, you'd smell hot eels before you saw them. Vendors chopped Thames eels into thumb-thick rings, then boiled them in spiced liquor flavored with parsley. Mayhew recorded a halfpenny buying you 5 or 7 pieces of fish and 3/4 of a cupful of broth. Cold versions set into a wobbly jelly because eel is naturally loaded with collagen, which is the whole reason jellied eels became a London icon in the first place. About 500 sellers worked the city between hot eels and pea soup combined. Eel was a sneaky superfood for poor families. Serious protein, a heap of omega-3 fats, and proper doses of vitamins A and D. That mattered a lot when most working-class kids never tasted fresh fruit. But the darker truth is what those Thames eels were actually swimming in. By 1858, the river was so foul with raw sewage that Parliament had to shut down because of the great stink. So your half-penny lunch was protein farmed from a river full of human waste. Therefore, the dish only survived because vendors switched to clean Dutch imports, and pie and mash shops kept the tradition alive long after the Thames stopped giving. Then there's the pea soup that warmed entire neighborhoods for almost nothing. Pea soup was the cheapest hot meal in London. A halfpenny bought you a full pint, ladled out of iron kettles bubbling over charcoal fires on freezing street corners. There was also a version called hot green peas, where vendors boiled the peas in their pods, and customers pulled them through their teeth after dipping in melted butter, salt, and vinegar. Mayhew interviewed one pea soup seller who was watching a rival clear 6 pounds a week, which was real money back then. But our man couldn't even afford fresh stock to compete. He told Mayhew he should have 5 shillings to take to market the next morning, but he only had 1 and 6pence in his pocket. Therefore, even the people running the trade were one bad day from starving. The shocking part is how good the soup actually was for the people eating it. Split peas are packed with plant protein, iron, and fiber. A single pint covered a big chunk of a working man's daily nutrition, so a homeless kid on a frozen Tuesday night got more real food from a halfpenny pea soup than a banker got from a 4-course dinner at his club. However, the next dish on this list came with a stove so fancy that people called it the Prince of Street Food. Now we move on to the baked potatoes sold from brass cans worth more than most houses. By the 1830s, around 300 baked potato sellers worked London full-time. The whole trade moved about 10 tons of hot potatoes every single day, which Mayhew priced at roughly £750 a week in season. The potatoes were baked in proper baker's ovens, then loaded into these gorgeous tin cans with brass and silver trim, charcoal compartments, hot water boilers, and built-in tubs of butter and salt. The fanciest can in Shoreditch reportedly cost 10 guineas, which was more than a laborer earned in months of work. Sellers named their cans things like Royal Union Jack and Prince of Wales. A penny got you a steaming potato wrapped in newspaper, which doubled as a hand warmer through brutal London winters. But the hidden detail nobody mentions is what the Irish potato famine did to the trade. After 1845, British customers grew nervous of any potato. One Mayhew interview captures a baked potato man confessing that foggy weather drove him to drink because he was so worried about losing customers to suspicion. However, while the baked potato kept Londoners warm, the next food on this list was so smelly that other poor people refused to share rooms with the people selling it. Now let's talk about the fried fish that came from Jewish refugees long before fish and chips. Long before fish and chips existed, London had fried fish. The dish came to Britain through Sephardic Jewish refugees from Spain and Portugal who'd been frying floured white fish for centuries to eat cold on the Sabbath. By the 1850s, between 250 and 350 fried fish sellers worked around Billingsgate Market. Vendors carried trays of cold fried fish slung from their necks, selling chunks for a penny with bread or a baked potato. Charles Dickens even mentioned a fried fish warehouse in Holborn in his 1838 book, Oliver Twist. The first proper fish and chip shop opened around 1860 in the East End suburb of Bow, run by a young Jewish immigrant named Joseph Malin. But the brutal side of this story gets erased from most history books. Mayhew wrote that fried fish sellers were so disliked because of the cooking smell that even other poor lodgers wouldn't share rooms with them. The sellers ended up living in attics in back alleys nobody else wanted, and the trade got tangled in anti-Semitism because of the Jewish vendors who built it. So while a Cockney bricklayer enjoyed his penny portion of crispy plaice, the woman who fried it slept in a freezing garret because nobody else would have her. Therefore, the next item on this list came with an even weirder twist because customers actually gambled to see if they got to eat it at all. Then there's the meat pies with a gambling secret most people miss. Penny pies were everywhere in Victorian London. About 20 hot piemen worked the streets full-time, while fixed pie shops slowly took over the trade. Fillings included beef, mutton, kidney, eel, and fruit, sold steaming hot from baskets carried under the arm or balanced on a wooden tray. But the unbelievable part is what pie men did at the curb. They ran a gambling game called Tossing the Pie Man. The customer would flip a coin. If the customer won, he got a free pie. If the pie man won, he kept the penny and gave nothing. Mayhew recorded one pie man saying he sometimes took 2 shillings and 6pence in pure profit from the toss alone, especially when drunk gentlemen on the spree played and lost. Some of those drunks even threw the pies at each other or at him when they won. Now the bigger question is what was actually inside these penny pies. London had a massive cat's meat trade that processed about 26,000 horses a year into pet food, sold off carts across the city. So when a penny pie tasted slightly off, customers had every reason to wonder if some of that horse meat had quietly moved up the food chain into human stomachs. Mayhew never proved it, but the fear was real and the cheap supply was sitting right there. However, the next food came with a sound that British Parliament actually tried to ban by law. Now let's get into the muffins that came with a band bell. The Muffin Man was a real person, and there were hundreds of him. Around 500 muffin sellers worked London streets in winter, mostly sons of bakers carrying head trays loaded with warm muffins under flannel cloths. The English muffin back then was a yeast bread, nothing like the sweet cake-style muffin Americans grew up on. The price was a halfpenny each for muffins or 4 crumpets for a penny, and most sellers threw in 13 or 14 to the dozen to keep their regulars loyal. Mayhew interviewed one muffin man who summed up his entire job with the line, "Butter's half the battle." But the wildest detail nobody knows is this. Parliament actually banned the Muffin Man's handbell in the late 1830s because Londoners kept complaining about the constant ringing. However, the law was completely useless. Sellers kept ringing their bells through every alley because the bell was their whole marketing strategy. Without it, customers had no idea you were on the street. The nursery rhyme about the Muffin Man on Drury Lane was already common by around 1820, which means it was nearly a folk song by the time Victoria took the throne. Therefore, one of the most famous children's songs in English history is literally about a guy breaking a noise ordinance. However, the next food on this list might be the most fraudulent thing you'll hear about all day. Now we move on to the coffee that wasn't really coffee. After the British government slashed coffee duties in 1842, coffee stalls exploded across London. About 300 of them set up across the city, mostly run by women trying to feed their families. A penny got you a mug of coffee, tea, or cocoa. 2 pennies got you a ham sandwich. The best pitches were corners like Duke Street and Oxford Street, and many stalls opened at midnight to feed night workers heading home from shifts. But the messy truth is that almost none of the coffee was real coffee. Sellers bulked the grounds with chicory, which was perfectly legal at the time. The chicory itself, though, was bulked with absolute garbage. A debate in the British Parliament on the 5th of June 1851 confirmed that chicory used in London coffee was being adulterated with horse beans, burnt beans, dog biscuits, powdered earth, and tan. Period reports added acorns, mangel wurzel, roasted wheat, roasted rye, and even baked animal liver to the list of bulking agents. So when a Cockney bricklayer slugged down a penny coffee before dawn, half of what he drank might literally have been ground up animal organs. Real coffee was expensive. Roasted horse liver was free if you knew a knacker. Therefore, working-class Londoners drank brown sludge that contained almost no actual coffee bean, and almost none of them ever found out. However, the next item is the one that actually started killing children. Then there's the penny lick ice cream that spread real diseases. Ice cream came to working-class London through Italian immigrants. A man named Carlo Gatti, born in Switzerland in 1817, arrived in England in July 1847 and built an ice cream empire by cutting ice straight out of the Regent's Canal. By 1858, he reportedly sold up to 10,000 penny ices a single day. Other Italian sellers, mostly from around Lucca, sold cheap slab ice cream called hokey pokey, the name coming from their cry of ecco un poco, meaning here's a little bit. By the late Victorian era, over 300 ice cream vendors worked the Holborn district alone. But the sickening detail is the glass itself. The penny lick was a small, thick, conical glass. Customers licked the ice cream straight out of it, then handed the empty glass back to the vendor. The vendor wiped it with a filthy rag, sometimes dipped it in murky water, and handed it to the next customer in line. An 1879 article in The Lancet directly blamed cholera outbreaks on these reused glasses. Inspectors later found ice cream samples containing bed bugs, lice, straw, human hair, cat fur, and bacteria linked to diphtheria, scarlet fever, and tuberculosis. Therefore, London finally banned the penny lick in 1899, though some stubborn vendors kept using them into the 1930s, so a halfpenny treat was quietly handing children deadly diseases. However, the saddest food on this entire list is the one sold by an 8-year-old girl. Now we get to the watercress that broke Mayhew's heart. Watercress was the very first cry you heard on a London morning. Fresh watercresses. Sellers bought bundles at Farringdon Market before dawn, washed them at the public pump, and tied them into penny bunches. Mayhew estimated about 14 million bunches sold in 1851 alone. Most sellers were the very poorest people in the entire city. Old women, sick men, Irish immigrants, and tiny children working from before sunrise. Mayhew's most famous interview was with an 8-year-old girl selling watercress on the freezing streets of Clerkenwell. She'd been working since she was 5. He wrote that she had entirely lost all childish ways, and that in thoughts and manner she was a woman. When he asked her about the park, she answered with one of the saddest lines in Victorian journalism. "The parks, where are they? She bore the cold by tucking her hands under her shawl even though it hurt her grip on the leaves. But the gut punch is what watercress actually is. Modern science calls watercress one of the most nutrient-dense foods on Earth, off the charts in vitamin C, vitamin K, calcium, and iron. So the poorest child in London was selling one of the healthiest foods ever discovered, while she herself was quietly starving. Therefore, the saddest fact about Victorian street food is that the people selling the cures couldn't afford the cures. However, the worst was still coming, because in 1858, a town in Yorkshire turned a bag of sweets into a mass killing. And finally, there's the Bradford humbug massacre that changed food safety forever. On a Saturday night in October 1858, a sweet seller in Bradford called Humbug Billy bought a fresh batch of peppermint lozenges from his supplier, a maker named Joseph Neal. Neal had cut the sugar with a cheap white powder called Daft, which was usually just gypsum or plaster, but a young assistant at the local druggist shop made the mistake that killed people. He grabbed the wrong barrel off the shelf. Instead of harmless gypsum, he sold Neal 12 pounds of arsenic trioxide. The two powders looked identical and sat side by side on unlabeled shelves. The arsenic went into roughly 40 pounds of lozenges, and about 1,000 of those sweets hit the market that weekend. 21 people died, over 200 fell violently ill, and doctors first misdiagnosed it as cholera. Each lozenge held an estimated 14 to 15 grains of arsenic, which is enough poison in one peppermint to kill 2 grown men. The 3 men involved were charged with manslaughter and walked free at trial, but the public outrage was so massive that Parliament passed the Adulteration of Food or Drink Act in 1860, followed by the Pharmacy Act in 1868. That single bag of sweets from a Bradford market is the reason modern food safety laws exist at all. Therefore, every time you read an ingredient label today, you're reading something that exists because 21 people in Yorkshire died from eating one peppermint. So that's the real truth about Victorian street food. So that's what people actually ate on the streets of Victorian London. Oysters slurped for a penny, hot eels in spiced broth, baked potatoes wrapped in newspaper, and penny pies won on a coin toss. Some of it was quietly brilliant. Some of it was quietly killing them. The watercress girl who broke Mayhew's heart helped get child labor laws written. The 21 dead in Bradford gave us food safety laws. The grandmothers who fed an entire city with nothing but a charcoal stove deserve to be remembered too. If this opened your eyes, hit subscribe. Thanks, and take care.